Just quickly before we begin, if you barely watch our videos on asset protection and tax, let this one be the one you watch, or at least up until the 15, 16 minute mark, because that's where some really good nuggets are. We're going to be sharing deeply personal stories on asset protection, real life nightmares. We pray none of this ever happens to you or your family. My goal in life is to one day to be able to turn this into a film series. Enjoy. So this video is why you should listen to us re asset protection, and we're going to go into really deep details of our dealings with a corrupt state, which every single person can absolutely be vulnerable of, especially as we said before in the last video, the middle class. But no one is safe, and I think two average Joes on YouTube talking about their experiences really does highlight that. Kicking it off. I mean, tell the audience some laws or things that say the UK government has done to harm you.
Well, I've experienced the government coming after me for a business deal that went wrong. It was fairly high profile, involved a football club in Scotland.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was a normal business deal, but it didn't quite work out as planned. And
Mhm.
when the state come after you, the first thing they do
Mhm.
is they freeze your assets. They freeze your bank accounts. They stop you
Mhm.
selling your house. They stop you effectively from being able to get the legal advice that you need. And of course, that causes a lot of problems if you're not
Mhm.
well set up. Hopefully, for most people, before these kind of things happen, they already have an offshore trust or family trust of some kind that owns some assets that you can get access to continue to pay the bills. Because what happens, and most people have never ever had the misfortune of coming up against the state, but when you come up against the state,
Mhm.
no matter
Yeah.
what expenses you have, they will try and restrict your spending to, I think in my case, they said it
Yeah.
was you were only allowed to spend like £500 a week or
Yeah.
something along those
And in
lines.
our situation, my uncle and my father were restricted to £350 a week to pay for everything, fund the family, pay the
Yeah,
mortgage. Is that actually going to
it's
happen?
kind
No
of things.
chance.
Fortunately, I was able to ignore it because I was well set up, and there's no way I was going to negotiate with the state over what I was going to spend at
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
time.
Mm.
So I was in a situation where
Mm.
I could ignore that. But if you're not organised, then you've got a big problem. And also, I should say, the state's accusations against me were proven to be completely false.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
I was acquitted of everything that I was
Mm.
accused of. But that doesn't stop years. It takes years from
Yeah.
the stage of accusation
Mm.
to getting to the place where you're completely innocent. And during all that time, you
Mm.
don't have access to your
Yeah.
assets. So you can't sell
Yeah.
your house. You can't get any money from anywhere. Your bank accounts
Yeah.
are frozen. Your assets are frozen. They ask you to list all your assets. So you're in a if you don't have some alternative in place
Mm.
in terms of perhaps a family trust or family members willing to help you out, then you've got a huge problem. And
Yeah.
I know in your dad's case, who experienced a similar type of
Hmm.
situation, even your mum's house, which
Mm.
she wasn't even allowed to sell that or
To
borrow
help
money
fund
against
his
that
defense, or yeah,
to
exactly, or
help
just
him.
be able to move on with life. It was disgusting. In our case, they have predetermined view of you as a person. They basically space their whole case around that. Anything that might help your defense, they're not going to actually disclose to you. I mean, my family, obviously, one person was the actually plus my uncle, so two were people of under investigation, not even charged yet. Um, Over 25 bank accounts closed. My bank account, I was 14 when the alleged charges happened. I was
What a
16
joke.
when it all then everything got frozen. My 90-year-old grandmother, my mum, as you know, with that, as you mentioned, with the house.
Yeah.
And then further, it's not just that. It's not just that. It's then not being able to. You can't open accounts. I have a list on my phone of like Monzo, Starling, N5, all these banks that I desperately tried to
Yeah.
open a new bank, wasn't allowed to, and I wasn't even blooming involved. I was not even the only reason I can think that they would do that is because they're going to say, "Oh, you're going to let your dad use your credit card to pay for things, and therefore he's banking through your bank." And I'm like, well, if an evil government body has just ruined your family member's life, your father's life, who's now my father's now passed away because of the stress of this. That's another
Yeah.
point. It makes you think, okay, every single person would help their blooming family member
Of
um
course.
get through that situation.
It's outrageous that they can even do that. I mean, I was outraged when I first heard about your mum's house being frozen because of all this when she had obviously nothing to do with business at all.
Mm,
But to
mm,
hear, I've just
yeah.
heard this. today, really, your bank accounts as a 16-year-old
Mm.
were closed or frozen as
Yeah.
well. I mean, it's an absolute outrage. I mean,
Yeah,
how
shout out
how
to
can they get
Lloyds
away with
Bank, Metro Bank, NatWest. Don't bank with any of those people, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well,
and
but the problem is you've got very few choices of where to bank in the UK. I mean, the answer is just don't bank in the UK because
yeah,
it's not a safe
exactly.
place
Yeah,
to keep you running.
totally agree. And you know, good point about my mum's house. I mean, my father was on the title ages ago, but because of all the stuff that was going on, and sadly businesses that had failed, he was effectively made bankrupt and didn't even have any stake in the property or equity in their property. So them freezing something that one was purchased before any of the charges at all. And before even charges were even issued, is just, you know, it's just totally unbelievable. And then, you know, only when he passed away in 2023, was the home unfrozen, and we could actually get on with our lives. Whilst, because of all the, you know, loans that had to be taken out to fund life, basically ate away at any sort of remaining equity in the property. I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah.
literally what happened. A whole, yeah. I mean, there's
But
so many things, but
with your dad's situation, that went on from what 2017,
exactly.
2018 was it until he
So
passed away
so
in
yeah, the
2023.
this is all for, you know, alleged stuff in 2012 and then 2016.
Yeah.
Obviously nothing true. My uncle, you know, you were exonerated for your stuff. My uncle and my dad. We'll imagine my dad is my uncle because he was alive. 11 out of 11 of the jury in, I think it was just the beginning of this year, found him innocent. Like, they just said, look, this is overreach. The government have just you know, coming with a predetermined view of things, and you know, clearly he wasn't
Yes,
guilty of those
the
things.
charges against your uncle Wilson were ridiculous too. I mean, they accused him of
Mu-
money laundering, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken,
yeah,
and that is just that's the ultimate in victimless crimes.
mm,
There's no victim to so-called money laundering, even though he didn't do anything at all.
yeah.
It was ridiculous, but even for it's a thing that they throw into everyone
Mm.
accused of any kind of white collar crime. They throw that one in just
And that has and it's funny. It's funny how murderers and all these terrible crimes that people actually do, you know, terrorism, you know, they're using these measures to then deal with white collar crime, get less of a sentence than money laundering is the highest sentence out of all of the possible people that I was looking at
really
on the. It's like 20 years. And the
seriously.
other
I
stuff
didn't know
was 5 to 10. It was ridiculous, unbelievable, and I can see why he was, you know, and he's really, you know, not in a good way. He's, you know, got back problems, the stress of it all. And you asking a question about the time. So we'll say the alleged offences will say, you know, 2012, 2016. We then had a house raid as well in 2018, to then constant, you know, assets still frozen all the way up until 2023. And you can imagine, you know, even though my father offered to cooperate constantly throughout the whole process, everything was transparent. At this point, and we'll go on to it later, we weren't set up offshore. We didn't have any. It was all based in the UK. We were all transparent, and you get punished for that. And that's exactly why we're making these videos, and we're going to get maybe some that have the last say, shall we say, and help people not pay tax to this disgusting UK government, and legally pay tax in other ways. And that's the goal. And maybe we'll have the last laugh in that sense. How can assets be frozen for more than a year or two? Especially, surely you should already have the evidence you have against someone to then have that reason to freeze their assets. Obviously, in this
Well,
case, they didn't, which shows that if they don't have the evidence, they're just going to keep spending loads of time trying to find it. And that's why for innocent people, it's probably worse because your time just keeps going. 10 years, you know,
yeah,
if
yeah.
they're guilty, it's quick. It's quick. It's like, bang, okay, they were guilty, their assets were frozen, problem sorted. But innocent people, oh, we can't find anything, so we need to keep those assets frozen for basically indefinitely. And like you said, in other private conversations, this is punishment in the process. Evil behavior.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, in many cases, they decide to go after someone. They'll go on a fishing expedition, and that means arresting them, raiding their house, and
Mm,
so on. Try and find some evidence against them because they seize all your devices, the computer, your phones, and everything, and in the hope that they'll find something
yeah.
there that's going to incriminate you,
Incriminate them.
and then decide on the charges. And you know, I think in my case, they didn't decide on the charges for about 2 years. The judge at the time was very close to throwing it out and told them, you have
Yeah.
to tell this man what he's been
You're
charged
you're then
with.
stuck in the slow bureaucratic council run useless people with jobs, processing all of this stuff, and you're now forced into their network of poor efficiency, so you can't even get things
Yeah.
done quickly. I mean,
You,
it's
you,
just,
you're forced to live this kind of life for years where you don't have access to your assets. Your life's basically on hold because you can't go and
yeah.
take advantage of the opportunities. You can't start new businesses. It's all consuming when you're involved in
Mm.
something like this. And you could say the same in commercial cases where you're being sued
Yeah.
by someone as well. The legal process can totally take over, which is why it's important if
Yeah.
to at least appear not to have many assets, because if you appear not
Mm.
to have many assets, you're not going to become a target.
Yeah.
I think everybody, particularly when you're young, people want to flaunt their wealth,
Mm.
and I would suggest that in this day and age, that's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, and also, trusting, their higher powers to do the right thing, be on their side. I mean, I think one mistake maybe our family made was trusting that actually, there's a honest justice system here. It's clearly bought and paid for. 15 million pounds spent against someone who couldn't even fund his own defense with legal aid, which is basically, I probably that 350 quid a week. I have no idea. Um, but he thought, okay, well, hopefully, at the end of the day, surely, I'm innocent. I'm gonna take out loans, fight this to the bitter end because eventually I'll get it all back and I'll get my compensation. Sadly, he passed away, no compensation, nothing. But maybe his mistake and our mistake was trusting at all that, no one's coming to save you. The government doesn't have your back. They don't care. They just want convictions. They're trying to tick a box basically to be seen to be doing stuff.
If you come up against the state,
Mm,
you're supposed to be innocent until found guilty, but
yeah,
in practice, it's the other way around. They assume you're guilty until you go and prove yourself innocent.
exactly. Yeah,
So whatever the propaganda is that you're innocent and found guilty, it's just not true. If you find yourself in this situation, you're guilty in the eyes of these government
mm,
bureaucrats that are coming after you with an unlimited budget
yeah,
until you prove yourself innocent, which has
yeah,
fortunately happened in my case.
yeah.
And
And this is
it's
all. This is often all before you're even charged as well. So this is before you're charged. This is like Nazi Germany, Stalinism vibes. Gestapo, police state operations.
I
And
keep in mind that nowadays you don't even have to be charged in the UK. The UK is
mm,
a real one of the worst police states in the world nowadays.
yeah,
They've got these things called unexplained wealth orders in the UK. So if they can't track where your money came from when you're living a lavish lifestyle,
yeah.
they can freeze your assets immediately
Although
with no
privacy,
penalties.
although everyone has a right to privacy, so it's ridiculous. And just some more damages from this. I mean, my uncle can speak more on this, but all of those years up until just recently, and even briefly after he was exonerated, no job, stuck on that tiny salary for forever, can't get a job because everyone just sees all these charges or libel on the internet about you. Can't shop online. You can't, there's no banking. It's just there's an endless list of not going out for a drink with some friends and being embarrassed that you can't buy a drink for yourself or whatever. Things like that. Unbelievable. Like and that's damaging long term as well. People will remember you for that. There's so many, and there's then you're not going to get any compensation for all this stuff. It's all for the libel and
Well, the biggest thing is when the money, I think the money isn't so important as the time that you lost because you
mm,
can't buy back the time. So you're like in the case of your uncle, you're talking about 2018 to this year, 7 years of messing around with
mm,
that case, and that's time that you never
never
get
get
back.
back. And
It's
he's
impossible. And how much is that time worth? You can't put a value on it because
exactly.
it's gone.
Yeah, and actually just saying the words, 7, 10 years doesn't do it justice. Honestly, it doesn't do it justice. The amount of pain our family has been through is unfathomable, and you can't put it into, just a few words of saying
Yeah, of
10 years.
course.
It's unbelievable. I mean, on top of that, we go to third party damages. I mean, with mum, imagine my mum with all of this, utterly stressed,
Of course.
potentially could have a heart attack herself from the stress of it, although she knows that he's not done anything wrong. She then gets stressed, passes it stress on to us. Obviously, I'm quite like to think confident person and don't get stressed with trading and investing and the stuff we talk about on here. We've got to be good at that. But
Absolutely.
but it passed on to my sister, and she sadly got a eating disorder, nearly died, and that was literally around the same time my father passed away, probably because of that added stress on top of this. Utter, this kills
Yeah.
people. It kills
It's
people,
it's a
and
real tragedy. The
mm,
state does kill people with these kind of things, and that's again why to bring it back to be able to take action
mhm.
long before anything like this happens. Even if you think this can never happen to me,
Exactly,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
let's face it,
We're talking about two instances,
we all
one
think
family and your family. There's only two.
we all
I don't
think.
know anyone. I don't know. You know other people. I don't know other people. And basically, families ruined. You can talk maybe quickly on your stuff, and then we'll touch on how we're set up now and what people
No,
do. But
I think
yeah,
the only thing I want to say is we all think it can never happen to us. I certainly
mm,
never thought it could happen to me, and it did.
mm,
And your story is even more illuminating because of how it affected the whole family,
mm,
and
yeah,
getting the whole family's accounts getting frozen even when they had nothing. You as a kid had
yeah.
nothing to do with business at all, and your
Mm.
accounts are getting closed. I mean, it's crazy. That just highlights exactly how dangerous it is to keep all your money in one jurisdiction.
Yeah, yeah. But and also on top of that, it's not like these things were happening. We just kept quiet. This is years later, towards the end. We then were like, "Come on, guys! You're wasting years of our lives. Here's photos of the damage you've done to my sister." And they said we're not interested. They just literally, it's
It's
pure evil, pure evil.
almost like they're not human.
Yeah, it is.
These
It
kind of people. I mean,
is exactly that. I
I,
mean,
I often wonder why would these people choose to get involved in working with the state? I mean, I
mm,
suppose people have to pay the bills, but there are more honorable ways of paying the bills than to work for an evil organization like the government.
yeah, yeah. And you have to ask them to get permission to do anything as well. And finally, I mean, all this sounds like we're not qualified to be giving asset protection advice, but you were set up reasonably okay in your situation. Obviously, my example is a really good example of the average person watching who isn't set up. But now I can, confidently say I'm set up much better. Still not
Yeah.
as good as you. And setting up in countries like Georgia, the US, having a family trust, things like that. It just moves the control back over to rightfully to the individual of their own lives. Perhaps touch on a little bit how you were set up during the process,
Well,
then and then now what changes you've made as well.
yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I had my main residence in the UK. I think about 1997, I moved to Monaco. So I was always kind of set up in a way that my assets were mainly outside the UK, or my family assets outside. I had a family trust at the top of the structure,
Mm.
and fortunately, that trust owned digital assets. We're fortunate to be investing in things like Bitcoin fairly early on, gold again back to the late 90s and so on. The trust had invested in things like
Hmm.
that. So it was in a fairly I
Mm.
didn't have big bank accounts sitting in the UK waiting for them to seize under in my
Yeah, well, yeah,
personal
exactly.
thing. So
If you
the
trust the state too much like we did and thought they were your ally,
yeah.
that is a
Well,
big, big no-no, that's for sure.
I never trusted them. My views of the state have been pretty consistent since I was about 20 years old. I've always detested the state. I've always seen them as a kind of mafia type organization that
Mm,
are
mm,
against the people of the country. And that is
yeah.
exactly what they are. You cannot trust the state, no matter if
Mm,
your favorite politician gets control of the state, whether that be a Trump or a Farage or any of the people that people are fans of nowadays.
mm,
That doesn't change anything. They're
yeah.
still going to want to collect taxes from you. They're still going to, the size of the state is still going to
Mm,
increase. There may be a few positive changes on the margins with someone like Trump or someone like Farage or whatever,
yeah.
but it's not going to fundamentally change anything. You
Yeah.
still have to be set up with, you still have to have your family trust, which owns the majority of your assets.
Yeah.
You've got to have a significant portion of your assets offshore.
Hmm.
Don't have a house as a sitting duck target,
Mm,
with no loans against it or
yeah.
whatever. So I mean, that's the easiest asset for anyone
Yeah.
to come along and seize, which is why the state loves to have everyone,
Hmm.
in a salary job with a house and a mortgage.
Yeah.
If you're in that situation, you're a sitting duck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you go in life, if that is your situation now, your goal in life has to be to get out of that situation. You
Yeah.
can't have that. Anything that you've got in your home country,
Mm,
you also have to have the mindset that you can walk away from that without thinking about it too much. If you've got
mm,
a house or whatever, some assets in a country like
mm,
the UK, which is increasingly authoritarian, you
mm,
almost have to have the mindset. Look, I'm set up
Yeah,
in
yeah.
other countries as well. I've got bank accounts offshore, I've got gold offshore, I've got cryptocurrency, whatever.
Mm.
And you've got to have the mindset, well, if I have to walk away from that asset, that's
Yeah,
life. I
yeah.
have to walk away from it because that may well be the situation that you're in one day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess you sort of laid out the structure there, but maybe to make it clear for people, I mean, family trusts that can own multiple LLCs or limited companies in Hong Kong, America, Georgia.
Yes.
That trust can be anywhere. It can be Cook Islands,
Your,
Georgia.
your, your, your trust is going
Yeah,
to own assets, and you
yeah,
mentioned the Cook Islands is a good choice of a trust jurisdiction, but there are others like Liechtenstein, like Cyprus, and so on.
yeah,
There are many, Panama also. So yeah, your trust is just going to own assets. And some
yeah,
people, they'll set up a trust to own specific assets, like
yeah.
they'll set up a trust to own a yacht or a
A
plane
house. Yeah.
or an expensive work of art or whatever. But I
Or
think
a charge or even a debt. So something that you mentioned in a great podcast that was the most viral bit of the podcast, using one of your companies that maybe owes you money or owes say your property money, having a friendly basically charge on the
and,
property that's
and,
maybe even greater than the value of the home, and that just creates that
yeah.
third or fourth layer of immunity that's very, I mean,
In,
that's yeah.
yeah, in simple terms, you're going to buy a house and you want to buy a house in the UK somewhere, it's a million quid to buy a
Mm,
house. Well, instead of going to the bank to get a mortgage, borrow the million quid from your own trust, and
mm,
that has the mortgage on your house. And
yeah.
that way you don't own it. Because keep in mind, what people find difficult to understand about a trust is
Mm,
when assets are in a trust, you no longer own them. When you give your assets over to a
mm,
trust, you no longer own those assets.
yeah.
Those are then independent assets that are held in trust
Mm,
for your children, your grandchildren, or a charity or
yeah, yeah.
whatever it's going to be. So you separate the use of the assets from the ownership of the assets, and that's the big advantage of having a trust, which is why
Yeah.
for any very high net worth person, it's worth having.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that charge could also you could decide if it's going to be the trust or the owned LLC or corporation underneath that has that asset. But yeah, the trust has, trustees and beneficiaries. It's an eternal entity with beneficiaries. So yeah, it's very, very good. And it's still people might think this is all totally illegal, but everyone knows that this is how all the wealthy set up and there's
Well,
nothing stopping you.
trust law originated in England, so
Mm,
an English common law trust goes back several hundred years,
mm,
and it goes back to the times when the noblemen with
mm,
their big country states were going off to fight in wars abroad, and they were worried, obviously, they were going to die in the war and not come back, so they put their assets in a
mm,
trust for their family,
yeah.
and that's how trust law came into existence. And of course, England should be the best place in the world for that, since England invented the common law trust, but other jurisdictions have stolen the lead from them and do a better job
Yeah.
now than they do in England. So I wouldn't, an English common law trust is better than no trust at all, but I
Mm.
wouldn't avoid inheritance tax. But you're
Yeah.
much better with an offshore trust nowadays. Yeah, everyone's got their own particular situation, so it's not something that we can give general advice for in terms of
Mm.
setting up trusts and structures, because everybody's got their own specific ways of doing
Mm.
things, and everyone's got different types of assets, and they've got different family relationships and so on. So it's really a
Mm.
very individualized thing. But what we were recommending in the last video, that was that at the very least everyone should have an overseas bank account, and that we
Mm.
were promoting the US LLCs with an overseas bank account, and that is not part of the common reporting standard, which
Yeah.
reports your bank account balances back to the UK government. So
Mm.
that's at least a starting point for
Yeah.
everybody. So I would suggest that
Layer one.
every
Yeah.
get started
Layer
with that.
one is like you should be good kind of layer. I
So
say sort of set
it's a
60%. It's done a big step basically, and then the other steps like the trust, like having more LLCs, are just extra layers.
It's a starting point. It's a starting point. It's a very cheap way of getting started, and then you can, as you say, you can then add on those
Build.
extra
Yeah.
layers. If you're a very high net worth person, you've got say more than 5-10 million in assets. You certainly, if you don't have a trust already, you should speak to us or somebody else about getting one.
I mean, I sent you an article the other day. HMRC, the UK tax authority, are going to basically be able to just extract money from people's account, pure stealing, just because they feel like someone might owe them some tax. They might even be wrong. They might even then later on be found that they didn't owe that money, and
Well,
it's not their
like
problem.
like
It's
like
your problem.
like all government
Yeah.
agencies. HMRC are a bunch of incompetent bureaucrats. I mean, anyone that works for HMRC should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, they should bring, in days gone by, tax collectors were tarred and feathered, and I'm certainly in favour of bringing that back because taxation is theft.
Yeah.
No one can defend taxation in any way. It's just a form of theft.
Yeah.
And the fact that these bureaucrats who are incompetent to start with and make lots of mistakes can dip into your bank account and take your money is outrageous. Nobody should keep a bank account in the UK other than for paying monthly bills or whatever, and they should keep the balance of that low.
Yeah.
It's not a place to keep assets or money.
Well, obviously America had the Civil War over just a couple of percent in regards to the UK itself, and now we're at like 50-40% levels. But
people should not cooperate with the state. I mean,
yeah.
If nobody cooperated with them, the state couldn't exist in its current form, and it's the only way to fight back against them is peaceful non-cooperation. And people should find legal ways not to pay the extortion that they call taxes.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
But more importantly, they should find ways to protect their assets, which we're keen to help you with. And because we have a lot of experience in this area, because of the experiences that we've been through, that we're talking about here, and other experiences in the past. And keep in mind too that these kind of situations where bank accounts are frozen and closed don't just happen in criminal cases. They can happen in commercial cases. They can happen in divorces. And people have to protect themselves. And it's one of these cases you can't get fire insurance after there's been a fire. You have to plan in advance, and you're not talking about spending a lot of money to get this insurance in place. And the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is if you're thinking of setting up some kind of asset protection structure, you don't want to go and take advice from your local lawyer in the UK or the country where you live, or accountant or whatever, because these guys, unfortunately, they're forced to become agents of the state. So if you go and say the wrong thing to those guys,
they'll snitch on you.
They can snitch
even
though
you're trying to do the right thing, even though you're
Yes.
trying to, live a honest legal life. If you've made a mistake and you're trying to rectify it or pay that extra bit of tax that maybe you should have paid, they're going to maybe snitch on you and then just cause the whole house of cards to come falling down. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications, and join our Discord chat room linked in the description so you can see these plays and get in these opportunities when we do.
In the modern world, great leaders resolve their conflicts with words.